talking about Cornelius, and specifically in regards to him as a person of prayer. To be known, heard, and seen by God, it is what we as Christians, it is what we believe, to actually uphold the claim that we are known by the creator of heaven and earth, who formed the creatures of the sea, who created the birds of the air. This God of ours hears our prayers. To say that we know the one true living God, it's not something that's minimal or taken lightly. We believe that when we pray, that when we cry out, that God hears our voice, regardless of where we're at. The Christian faith is one that believes and upholds the fact that God is the one who created humanity and is keenly aware of our well-being, our needs. Every woman, every daughter, every man, every son, young and old, all who confess and call upon Jesus are heard by him. Our God formed us, created us. He sees us. He hears our prayers, and he's hearing your prayers. And today I want to talk to you about Cornelius, who understood this reality, a man who, despite his ethnic identity, his profession, it was a profession that perhaps it barred him from entering into the temple in the inner courts to worship the one true God. Despite these boundaries and challenges that were set upon him, he still prayed to God. He was a person who didn't allow the limitations to define his response, reality, or relations with others. He was a person who lived in a Gentile city, but he didn't allow his surroundings to inhibit or prohibit his devotion to God. And second, we also notice that he didn't allow any obstacle to prevent him from caring for others and pursuing God. From this, we learn that God has no limitations on being able to reach you where you are at. So let us not be limited in our relationships and in our response to God and to others. Acts 10 begins with Cornelius in the city of Caesarea. He is a centurion of the Italian cohort, yet he was not just some rugged military Gentile living in a beachfront city like Newport. He was a devout man. He was a man who feared God with all of his household. We notice in verses 1-2 that he gave many alms to the Jewish people, and he prayed to God continuously. As a centurion, as a Roman, Cornelius led his household to have reverence for the Jewish God. But we must notice that his ethnicity, his occupation, even his location would have limited his associations with the Jewish people, and even more from God. He was a man who was not supposed to be a believer. He was a Gentile. Everything about him, his background, his job, his associations, his friends, his family, everything about him all pointed to a life that was supposed to be without God. He was supposed to have a life that was dedicated and handed over to the service and worship of the emperor. But Cornelius, in some way, we don't know how, and in many ways, like all of our stories, we become acquainted with the gospel of God. We find out about God, and like Cornelius, we develop a response and devotion to God. Luke describes Cornelius as a man who feared God, a devout man. He gave alms and he prayed. Somehow, like the testimonies of many of us who are within a culture and climate that does not honor God, somehow Cornelius finds the truth, the true reality about the one true God, and somehow Cornelius is transformed. Some way, God finds Cornelius in the darkness, Cornelius finds God, and God finds him in a city by the sea. Luke describes Cornelius with language that would be reflective of a pious Jewish person and righteous and pious person, just like any other Jewish person in Jerusalem. However, he was a Gentile who lived in Caesarea, and it was to this person that God sent his angel to give him a message. But now, why would God send his angel to a person who lived in Caesarea? Why does God seem to have this uncanny ability to have his eye upon those whom the world cannot see? Why does God sometimes seek for those in places in which we think sometimes there's nothing to be found? You see, Caesarea was one of the most Romanized cities in Judea. When Octavian, the Roman emperor, confirmed Herod as the king of Judea, the city was rebuilt and the city was renamed to Caesarea Maritima, or Caesar by the Sea, in order to demonstrate a loyalty to the emperor. Now, this city, Caesarea, it was dedicated to the Roman emperor. It was not a godly city like Jerusalem, but it was on the shoreline where the Gentiles and the merchant travelers would meet and would live together. It was kind of like your luxurious truck stop by the sea. It was where people stayed there for the beach life and entertainment, only to travel to Egypt or to Rome. The city had a massive harbor with a lighthouse that was larger than the one in Athens. Herod had built a temple which he dedicated to Augustus and Roma, the goddess of Rome. The temple was in the center of the city, and he stood on the platform facing the Mediterranean. Now, this city accommodated many of its inhabitants to a Greco-Roman lifestyle. It had a massive stadium and a theater that had the capacity to seat 5,000 people. This city reflected a Greco-Roman city. It was Caesarea, a city that focused upon the needs of a Gentile population. It was the worldly city during Cornelius' time, and it aimed to draw the attention not of God, the God of Israel, but it aimed to draw the attention of the gods of Rome. It was in this city that Pontius Pilate resided. It was here where Paul was imprisoned before he was sent to Rome. Caesarea's grandeur, exquisite architecture and buildings, it gave people a taste of Rome in the East. But despite its allure and imitations of the Greco-Roman life, it was also in this city that we find this God-fearing centurion named Cornelius. Out of all the places, God found Cornelius in Caesarea. Out of all the places, a Gentile Roman soldier still had the ability to worship the one true God. And regardless of this city, God sends his angel to this place. You see, God is not limited to those just in Judea. God is not limited to solely the rich and the powerful. God is not limited to solely hearing the prayers of the religious. God sent his angel to Cornelius, a believer, a prayer warrior, someone who was in the most worldly cities in Judea. God sent his angel to Caesarea. Regardless of where you're at, God can still send his angel to you. The true worshipers, the people who serve and pray to the Lord, are never far beyond the reach of God. You see, when Lot was living in Sodom, see, God knew where Lot was at, and God sent his angels to rescue Lot and his family. When Hagar, the servant of Sarah, was with Ishmael and she was alone, dying in the desert, you see, God saw her alone in the desert, and God sent his angels. When the Israelites were in Egypt and Pharaoh would not release the Israelites, God sent his angels to slay all the firstborn. When Gideon was discouraged, God sent his angels to call him a mighty warrior. When Daniel was in the lion's den, trapped. God sent his angels to shut the mouths of the animals that sought to devour him. When Zacharias was ministering in the temple, God sent his angel Gabriel to bring him good news. God is not limited by anything. There is no place in which you can be at in which where God would not send his angels. Paul reminds us of this in Romans 8, that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God. God has his eye upon the world, and he hears your prayers. Our God hears our prayers. He sees where we are at. He knows what we're living in. Whether it's in the beach coastline of Santa Monica or the inner cities of Linwood, God has his eye upon us. God has his eye upon all those who call upon him. And he is not limited. He knows your petitions, Biola. He sees your good deeds. God is hearing your cries when you're there in your dorm room and you don't want no one to hear you. He hears your voice. Biola, be faithful in your relationship with God, because God is always faithful to you. Do not be limited in your relationships with others, because God is never limited in his relationship with you. In Acts 10, verses 1 through 8, Cornelius sees this angel, and the angel says, "Cornelius," and then he responds, "What is it, Lord?" And then the angel says, "Your prayers and alms have ascended as a memorial before God." Prayers and alms. Words and actions. Our voice and our movement, it reaches God's throne room like a standing monument, etched with our names and descriptions of our lives, forever remaining in his presence. What is prayer to this Roman centurion? It is praying where you are at, regardless of how far away you feel from God. It is praying even though you don't feel like it. It is praying even when you feel that God is not listening to you. It is praying even though you may be the only one praying. We have to recognize that Jerusalem, the temple in Jerusalem, was a house of prayer. But Cornelius was in Caesarea. Cornelius couldn't enter into those inner courts. He was forbidden. By Jewish law, there were warning signs that were written in Greek and Latin, and it let everyone know if Gentiles were to enter these inner courts, that they would be executed. They took this very seriously. In fact, Paul almost experienced the repercussions of this policy when he traveled to Jerusalem, to the temple, with a Gentile. He was attacked and almost nearly beaten by large crowds during his final years of his life because they claimed that he brought a Greek to the temple. But regardless of the walls that were built to prevent Cornelius from entering in, Cornelius's prayers still entered into the sanctuary of God. Cornelius got in. He didn't allow these man-made boundaries stop him from seeking God. And we too should not allow the troubles or the obstacles in our lives to prevent us from calling out to God. Cornelius's prayers got in. Your prayers are being heard in the throne room of God. There is nothing that can hold back or prevent your voice from entering and being heard by God's throne. Nothing. Cornelius prayed. He didn't pray in no Roman temple. He prayed to God and God responded. He may have not been able to enter into the temple in Jerusalem. He may have even felt far away from Jerusalem. And sometimes that happens with us. We feel so far away from God and we can't go to the places that we want to go to. It's like, no, I don't want to go to church today. But I had a rough week. But Cornelius prayed, and we too must pray. We pray in our homes. We pray with our spouses. We pray with our families. We pray with our friends. We pray with our youth groups. We pray in our dorms. We pray when we're alone. We pray, hopefully, most of the time before our final exam. But we pray, and we say, God, when we are drowning in this world. We pray when we hear bad news. We pray when we feel abandoned. We pray when sickness overcomes us. We pray when we hear about our family members, our loved ones have cancer or something happening. We pray. Cornelius prayed. An angel responded and called him by name. Biola, God knows your name. The voice of our prayers cannot be silenced. But it's not just prayers like Cornelius. We also put into motion our prayers' actions. Cornelius didn't just pray, but he gave alms to the Jewish people. Almsgiving was charity to the poor. It was being concerned about those who are less fortunate. It's not championing the greed or lionizing the rich. It is being moved and concerned with those who don't have resources or economic opportunities. It takes action in this world and in society. Moses reminded the Israelites that if one of them becomes poor or falls into poverty, that they should help them. We should not harden our hearts to the poor and the landless, because we too were poor and landless without an inheritance if it was not for Jesus. We care about the poor because God cares about all people. We are all poor before God, in need of his mercy and of his grace. Cornelius was a man of Roman privilege and prestige. Yet Cornelius did not fool himself in thinking that just because he was okay, that just because he was well off, that he had no responsibilities towards others. Cornelius did not allow his Roman prestige to define the boundaries of who or whom he should give alms to or bless with charity. Just because Cornelius was a Gentile, it did not mean that he should despise his fellow Jews. He didn't allow these ethnic limitations to define his opportunities to do what is right and to give voice to those who had no place at the table. Just because we're not refugees does not mean that their poverty and suffering should be ignored. Just because we have a great job or at a nice place, it does not mean that the depleting jobs in our rural country should be ignored. Cornelius was a Roman, but yet he cared about others who were not. Cornelius didn't place any limitations on his relations because God had none with him. He was faithful in his prayers and in his charity. His piety, his prayers, and his almsgiving, they traveled up into the divine throne room of God, and they got God's attention. Do you want to know how to get God's attention? Do what is right and always pray. That'll get God's attention. And so God sends his angel to him so that he may be eventually visited by Peter, the apostle of the church. Peter, the representative of the Jesus movement that is about to change the world. Cornelius was this first Gentile to swing open the door that provided opportunities for Jewish people like Peter to see that God was indeed doing something amongst the Gentiles. To conclude, this story, this small short story in the book of Acts, it reminds us that despite our locations, wherever we are at, whatever city we are in, whether the city honors God or not, regardless of whatever disadvantage or obstacle may be presented before us, it should not stop us from worshiping God. This should not prevent or hinder our relationship with God or others. Cornelius did not allow his limitations to define his relations. He didn't place limits on God because God did not place limits on him. You see, Cornelius lived in a city in which the majority of its inhabitants did not see God, but this didn't hinder his devotion. I've been a Christian for over 15 years. In fact, out of all the people, I shouldn't be preaching. I come from a lineage of failed ministers. I was born into a family in which many turned away from the faith. I come from the inner city of San Diego, where gangs and violence were just one wrong turn away. I come from a family in which no one went to college. The world had set before me the script of my life, where I was supposed to be, where I was supposed to live, and what type I should get. But I would not allow the world to set the script in my life and to set the agenda for my relationships with God or with others. You see, when none of our friends believe, when no one within our family supports, when we feel all alone, it is at these times, at these moments, that we need to break through those obstacles and not be defined by these limitations, because God does not place any limitations with you. How then should we respond? Biola, when things seem hopeless, pray to God. Pray like Cornelius. Do what is right. This journey of ours, it is tough, and it goes through its valleys and its mountaintops. But God is sending his angels to you. God is hearing your prayers. God sees you where you are at. You may feel alone when you're walking in these hallways, but God's looking at you. Cornelius, he prayed and he was concerned about his fellow brothers and sisters. Let us also be concerned about those around us, both our black and white, the refugee, the immigrant, the poor, the evicted. Let us be concerned about all of those who are around us, because our attitudes and our actions, along with our prayers, ascend to God like a memorial. This is how we cross these spiritual obstacles that are set up by the enemy. This is how we overcome. Our answer is coming. Your prayers are being heard, and God is looking at you. And God is talking to his angels about you. And God is placing your deeds and your prayers as a memorial before his throne. Let us, like Cornelius, never be defined by our limitations and opportunities, because God is not limited by them. This is the word of the Lord for you today. You may go in peace.
Discover who you're called to be at Biola University, a leading Christ-centered university in Los Angeles, with programs on campus and online. Subscribe for more of our videos and learn more at biola.edu.